excited for this one because I love it. This is not knit, this is crochet, and I'm super excited to do color work. I released a sock that is simply learning how to make your basic sock. It's absolutely wonderful. If you've never done a sock before, it's a great video to start with. But I'm using the base of this, which is completely adjustable, but the top part of the sock, the color work, is kind of set in stone. It's an 8-stitch repeat. So this is a really fun sock, adding that color work at the top. And let's talk about the supplies. For this pattern, I use Stroll fingering weight yarn in Treasure and Rainforest Heather. It's absolutely pretty. Be sure to check out this yarn. I think it's fantastic for socks because it is a superwash merino wool, which I love, and 25% nylon. And that nylon is what helps give it the softness and that stretch that's so great for socks. You'll also need 2 hooks, a 3.5 millimeter that will be used throughout the sock, and then a 2.5 millimeter for the ribbing at the top of the sock. Of course, you will also need some scissors, a yarn needle, and a stitch marker to keep track of our rounds because we are working continuously. We're not going to be joining anywhere. There are no seams on the sock, which is fantastic, especially for wearing it, so we don't have any seams that bother our feet. And it is super fun to work up. So let's go ahead and get started. So we're going to be starting with our 3.5 millimeter hook and our color A. So this is the main body color of your sock, and color B doesn't come in until the color work portion. I'm going to start by doing a magic ring, and then we are going to single crochet 8 stitches inside of this magic ring. But I want to note something about the type of stitches we're going to be working. We are going to be working what's called a split single crochet, also known as a waistcoat stitch. So these stitches for the first round are worked in your regular single crochet stitch, but for the rest of the toe, we will be working in that knit look stitch. And to do this stitch, the most critical part of this stitch is when you insert your hook, yarn over and pull up a loop. That loop that you pull up needs to be the height of the loop on your hook. Otherwise, this is going to be a very frustrating stitch. What that does by pulling up what this second loop is called the magic loop, if you pull that up higher, it gives more space to the V on the front of that, which means it is easier to work into for the next round. So for round 2, I'm going to partially close my magic ring. I don't want to close it all the way because I find it easier to work round 2 and then close it after round 2. It gives us a bit more space because we're really looking at these stitches and examining them for that split single crochet. So my very first stitch here, I'm going to look at the V on the front, and for split single crochet, we will enter into the center of that V, so not our normal spot, the center of that V, and then on the back side of our work, we're coming out behind the upside down V. Then we yarn over, pull up a loop, yarn over and complete that stitch, and remember to pull up that loop quite a bit. Going to go ahead and mark the first stitch for this round, and we will be increasing. So I'm going to do another single crochet into that first stitch. So we're doing 2 split single crochets into the first stitch and in each stitch around. So we're doing 2 single crochets into each stitch around, and I keep saying single crochets. I'm working them as a split single crochet or that waistcoat stitch so that they have that knit look. If this frustrates you, I know round 2 can be a bit tricky. Usually when you get past it, it'll get a bit easier. You can always do this round in regular single crochet and then work the round after that in the split single crochet. Or if you really don't like it, you can work the first part of this sock in a regular single crochet. Maybe tighten your tension just a little bit. This stitch is a bit tighter than a regular single crochet simply because of where we are entering our hook. Now that I've completed round 2, we've increased from 8 stitches to 16. I'm going to move my stitch marker and go ahead and pull that magic ring closed, and you can go ahead and pull that tight. And now we are ready for round 3, which round 3 we will not be doing any increasing. We're simply going to be doing split single crochets in each stitch all the way around. So we're not changing the stitch count, we're simply doing 16 split single crochets all the way around. Now for round 4, we will be increasing again. We are going to be doing 2 single crochet stitches into split single crochet stitches into the first stitch. We're going to mark the first stitch of this round because we don't want to lose track of that since we're working continuously. And then we're going to split single crochet into the next. And we'll be repeating that all the way around. So that's 2 split single crochets and then split single crochet into the next stitch. We will increase from 16 to 24 stitches for this round, and the next round, so for round 5, we're simply going to be doing split single crochets all the way around without increasing. So come on back for round 6. Now for round 6, we will be increasing again. We will place 2 split single crochets into the very first stitch, and then be sure to mark that first stitch of the round. And then we're going to do split single crochets into each of the next 2 stitches. And that's going to be our repeat all the way around. Sorry, I split my yarn there and I do not like that I did that. Don't do that too often, but I definitely want this to look clean and sharp, so it's always worth going back. So the repeat for this round is 2 split single crochets and then do a split single crochet into each of the next 2 stitches. And this will increase our stitch count to 32 stitches. Now for round 7, we'll simply do a split single crochet stitch into each stitch around, not repeating, so 32 stitches still, and then come on back for round 8. And now for round 8, which this will be our last increasing round for the toe for these instructions, I'm going to do 2 single crochet stitches into the first, marking the very first split single crochet of this round, and then we're going to do split single crochets into the next 3 stitches. And that's our repeat around, so we'll do 2 split single crochets into the next stitch, and then split single crochet into each of the next 3 stitches. And then for round 9, we will not be increasing. We're going to just single crochet in each stitch around. And so at the end of round 8, we'll have 40 stitches, and same for round 9, and come back for round 10. And now we're ready for round 10, and believe it or not, this is where we start to do our stitch pattern. So you can see here, this is all done in that knit look stitch, and then this is a bit of a different established stitch pattern. It's a 2-stitch repeat, and it's really, really fun to do. So if you did want this to be larger, if you have an extra wide foot, you can go ahead and increase one more time. Just remember that by the time we get to this top part here, this has to be an 8-stitch repeat. You can also go ahead and roll with this, see how you like it, and if you need to increase as your foot goes, we can add increases in there more so than here. So I did 2 increases for the gusset before I got to the heel, but if I did increases along the way, that would be fine too. If I did 2 more, so it would be on each side here, as I went up, that would also end up being an 8-stitch repeat. So for the instructions as they're written, we're going to go ahead and start our established stitch pattern. That means for the very first stitch of the round, we're going to do a split single crochet, then we're going to mark it, and the next stitch will be a single crochet into the back loop only. Then it will be a split single crochet and a single crochet into the back loop only, and that is our stitch repeat. It's just split single crochet and then single crochet in the back loop only all the way around. It's really relaxing to work up. I just love this stitch. I love the texture. I love how it works well for a sock and also other garments. I have other patterns on my blog if you are interested that use this stitch. We'll simply use that stitch, and that is our repeat, and we're going to work that for 30 rounds. So that's this section here before I get to the gusset rounds. This for my foot is 30 rounds. However, if you this is where the length of our feet comes in. So this is a lot of times where, you know, the size 7, 7.5, 8, 8.5 come in, is the length of our foot. So you're going to work it until about 1 to 1.5 inches before we want to split for the heel, and then we'll be doing the gusset. So work it, try it on, see how it goes, and then if you need to add more stitches you can, and stop when we get to about 1 inch to just over 1 inch before your heel, and we'll work these gusset stitches. So I'm going to work this section of just repeating this for 30 rounds and then come on back. So now that I've worked 30 rounds in this established stitch pattern, it's time for us to increase for the gusset. This is what helps our heel fit best, and that way we can actually get the sock on over our heel. So if you look really closely at these stitches, this is round 30. This is a round we'll be doing next. This is an increase. You can see where it kind of forks out and increases, and then I do another increase here. So let's go ahead and talk about how to do that. We'll be doing that on each side of this sock. So for the first stitch in my round, I'm simply going to do 3 split single crochets into the same stitch. Now, yes, I did leave my stitch marker all the way down here. The reason why is sometimes I don't like to move it up every single round. So for this stitch pattern, I can definitely follow it up and I know when I'm at the beginning of my round, but now I'm going to move it because I'll need to keep track of this. I am going to mark that first stitch of this round. And now I'm going to be working half the stitches. The reason why I'm saying half the stitches is because if you want to customize this, we don't have to pay attention to stitch counts. Yes, I include stitch counts in the patterns as a baseline, but you don't necessarily have to pay attention to stitch count to do a custom fit because the instructions will also work out no matter what stitch count you do. So now I'm going to work in the established stitch pattern for half the stitches of this sock. Now that I've worked half the stitches, so I did 3 split single crochets into the first, and then I worked 19 stitches in the established stitch pattern, I'm going to be doing that again. I'm going to place 3 split single crochet stitches into the next stitch. And then I'm going to be working in the stitch pattern for the remaining 19 stitches in the round. So now that we've done 2 rounds from the last increase, it's time to increase again. So we're going to be doing this with the exact same instructions, just a bit different stitch counts. So I'm going to do 3 split single crochets into the first stitch and then mark the first stitch of the round. And then we are going to be working the next 21 stitches, or like including the increased stitch, half the stitches of this sock. So now I will work in the established stitch pattern for 21 stitches and then we will increase again. Now that I've worked the 21 stitches, we're back to this point where we do 3 split single crochets into the next stitch. And then we will work the remaining 21 stitches, or half the stitches in this round, for the sock until we get to the end of the round. Now we're back at the beginning of the round again, and it is time to do 2 more rounds in the established stitch pattern, just as we did before, and then we'll talk about the next steps after that. So just 2 more rounds, relaxing, doing that established stitch pattern repeat, and then come on back. Our gusset started just over 1 inch before the heel, and now we should be at the point where we want to make space for our heel. So that's what we will be doing next. I'm going to move my stitch marker here, and then I'm going to work the first 24 stitches in this round in the established stitch pattern. So for me right now, I have a stitch count of 48 stitches, and we're going to be working half of those, so the first 24 stitches in the established stitch pattern. Now that I've worked the first 24 stitches, we are going to chain, or if you prefer to do a foundation single crochet, you can, but I'm going to chain 24 stitches and skip the last 24 stitches. Now after skipping those 24 stitches, we're going to start our next round in the established stitch pattern. So I'll simply start that first stitch in the split single crochet and place my stitch marker. So here's where we can really see what we're doing here. This is called an afterthought heel. This is where we make some space for the heel, and we keep on working the top of the sock, and we will come back later and work the heel after we finish the top. So work this last. So what I will do next, and what you'll be doing next, is working in the established stitch pattern all the way around, and I'll show you what we do when we get to these stitches here. So as we get back to these chain stitches, we can't really work those in the established stitch pattern yet because they are just chains. So what I will do for this round is simply single crochet across all the chain stitches, and then on the next round I can continue to work in the established stitch pattern. Now as I come back around to these heel stitches, I'm going to go ahead and be able to work those in that established stitch pattern, keeping everything looking nice and neat. Now here's where I want to make a note. For this section, we're going to be doing 6 total rounds after the split for the heels. So we've done this one round, I'm doing my second round, and I'll do 6 total rounds. Right now I have a stitch count of 48 stitches, and that's how I originally designed this sock. That way that these stitch repeats were an 8 stitch repeat. I do worry, however, I want you to have the best fit possible. So I have created a chart where I took out a couple stitches between these designs, and I've made an optional chart that is a 6 stitch repeat just in case you're kind of ending up between sizes here. It's more important to wear a sock based off of fit, and you'll still be able to get these designs in. It will just be a bit more condensed left to right. But I wanted to include that option because I don't want you to get stressed about your stitch counts. I really just want you to customize the sock for you. But be aware that at this point, if you need to add or decrease stitches to make it either a 6 or 8 stitch count, please do so that you can use one of the charts to do this beautiful color work. So I'm going to keep doing these rounds, and I'll come back when we're going to be starting this color work area. So now after working the established stitch pattern for some rounds after the heel, it is time for us to start working in the split single crochet only, because then we'll do our color work. So for this next round, instead of working in the established stitch pattern, we're going to work every single stitch around as a split single crochet, marking that first stitch in the round, and then working the next one as a split single crochet as well. So it's going to change the look of the fabric on this sock, but it's also going to be nice for the color work, and it will look like it's all done in a mock knit stitch by using that split single crochet. Now that I have the first round of all split single crochets done, I want to take a moment and talk about that chart. So we've completed round 1 of this chart. This is an 8 stitch repeat. This chart is read from right to left and from bottom to top. You will repeat each segment until the end of the round. So you just keep repeating in the 8 stitch repeat. I do also have a 6 stitch repeat chart as well that's a bit more scrunched together in case you needed that amount of stitches around. For this next round, for round 2, we will be doing split single crochets in this color, the color yellow, so our color A for the first 4, and then 1 in our color B, and then 3 in the color A. I'll talk about how to do those color changes and how to carry our yarn in just a moment, but this is the chart we will work. I'm going to show the first couple rounds on camera, but then the rest of this will be just a repeat of what I will have taught you, so I'll let you work that on your own. We will get started with round 2 by moving our stitch marker, and the first 4 stitches of round 2 are done with our color A, so I will do that. But on my first stitch, of course, I will want to grab my stitch marker and mark that first stitch of the round. So there's our first stitch, and then 2, 3, and then when we do the 4th stitch, we know that our very next stitch we will need to change colors. So before we finish this stitch, we'll want to yarn over with our new color. What that does is it completes the previous stitch in the correct color, but it sets us up with our new color for the next stitch, which will be in color B. And then we're already switching back to color A, so we'll want to yarn over and finish that stitch with the color A. So that's a nice way to change colors, and then the next 3 stitches are in color A, and that's the repeat all the way around for round 2. So it's an 8 stitch repeat. I want to point out though, I don't want to carry the yarn on the back for too far. So I'm not crocheting over my unused yarn as we go because it can make it a bit bulky. When we work in the Fair Isle way, we carry the yarn on the back of our work, which creates these beautiful floats. I know it looks a bit messy, but it's actually quite clean for color work. And we don't have strands that go too far, and so it won't catch on our toes as we put them into the sock. So I don't like to carry more than 3 stitches at a time. And I want to show you how to catch stitches here. I'll insert my hook into the next stitch. I'm going to be making a stitch with the color A, but I'm going to grab my color B and lay it over my hook. And now I will complete the color A. And what that does is it grabs the yarn in the back, making that float not so long, and it helps it carry along the back of my work until I'm ready to use it again. And now I'm ready for a color change. And then I'll want to remember every so often, sometimes I do every 3rd stitch, I'll just simply grab this yarn, a lot of times with my other finger, and just loop it over my hook. And now I know I've caught it. I'll work a couple more stitches. And then I'll simply catch it again. It's just sitting on top of my hook. And that creates those nice floats on the back of my work. Now the rest of this, so round 3 is just a repeat of round 2, and then it's just working the same color work using the chart all the way through round 25. So I'm going to work up a bit and I'm going to come back on round 25. So now that we've completed the color work portion of the sock, we can go ahead and fasten off our color B as we don't need it anymore unless you want to make the top cuff your color B, which can also be cute as well. I'm going to keep mine consistent with my first sock, and I'll be doing this ribbing with my color A. We will be going down to our 2.5 millimeter hook. The reason being is we want this cuff to be tight enough to keep it up on our leg as well. We don't want this slipping and sliding down if we want it to stay in place. So what we will do is we'll be chaining and then working in rows. For this sock, I'm doing a 10 stitch ribbing. So I will chain 11 because I will need a turning chain. Then I like to tighten down my turning chain, and in the back loop only, we will be single crocheting 10 single crochets across. And the next thing we will do is slip stitch the next 2 stitches from the top body of the sock. So we're slip stitching through 2 stitches on the top of the sock, and then we're going to rotate our work around because we're going to be working back down this row. Now we are going to skip those 2 slip stitches that we just did from the body, and in the back loops only, single crochet across the ribbing stitches. So we will be single crocheting 10. Then I'm going to chain 1, turn my work again, and we're going to be repeating here. So we'll be doing 10 single crochet stitches in the back loop only. All these will be the back loop only because that's what creates that ribbed look and give in the stitch. And then we will slip stitch 2 stitches from the top of the body of the sock. And then turn and skip those 2 slip stitches and work 10 stitches down the back loop only of this next row. So we'll just be repeating those 2 rows all the way around the top of the sock, and then come on back and I'll show you how to join your first row with your last row. Now that I've worked the ribbing around the top part of this sock, it's time for us to join our current edge with our starting edge. And to do this, I am simply going to start by chaining 1 and entering my hook in the back loop only. So exactly what we have been doing, but now I'm going to go over here and find the loop from the top stitch on the first row and also insert my hook through that loop. And then I'm going to yarn over and pull through all the loops on the hook to create a slip stitch that joins those together. And then we'll be repeating that all the way down this row. So we're simply going to go through the back loop, enter the loop from the first row, and then go ahead and slip stitch that together. That will join these 2 edges nicely, and then we'll be ready to go onto the heel after we complete this section. Now after working through that last slip stitch, I can go ahead and fasten this off and weave in my end. Now we're ready to work our heel, and we will be going back to our 3.5mm hook for the heel, and you will also need 2 stitch markers to complete this heel as well. We're going to start by grabbing on one side of this heel and simply doing a slip stitch to just join the yarn. This is the first stitch of our heel, and I'm going to go ahead and split single crochet into that first stitch from the bottom part of our heel. So we have a total of 48 stitches for this sock, but no matter what your stitch count is, it really isn't a big deal if your stitch count is different at this point. It's all about making it custom. There will be half the stitches on the bottom and half the stitches on the top. So we're going to work the half bottom stitches first. And now that I've done my first stitch, I can go ahead and place a stitch marker in that first split single crochet. We're going to be working the entire heel in split single crochets just like we did for the foot so that it has a nice matching heel. So for the next stitch, I'm going to split single crochet, and same for the next. So all the stitches across the bottom of this heel, I will be working in split single crochets. So now that I've worked half my stitches across the bottom here, it's time to rotate my work, and we're going to be working the remaining stitches across the top. Before our very first stitch of this top, we're going to place a stitch marker. Now if I were to just simply work into the very first stitch across the top, we would find that it creates a hole here. That's absolutely normal. That's what happens in socks. We can use the tail end and we can weave that in later, but I just want to show you a trick if you don't want to have to close that hole later, is before entering that first stitch, you can go ahead and grab some of the side stitches across here and then enter that first stitch and simply yarn over and pull through all the loops. It kind of creates what looks like a star stitch, but that will naturally close that hole for you. But we want to mark this stitch because this is the first stitch across the top. We want to mark this one as well. And now I'm going to continue working the stitches across the top of this sock, and you can work them in split single crochets if possible, or you can simply work across those chain stitches for this round. Now that I've worked my way back towards the first stitch of the round, I have one stitch left to work, and I'm going to go ahead and use the same trick as I did on the other corner. When working this last stitch, I'm simply going to go into that stitch and then pick up a couple along the side here. You don't have to do this if you don't want to. It's just a way to kind of close that hole so you don't have to worry about weaving it in later, even though sometimes it's still necessary too. It's just something that happens in socks. And now I've completed that round. So I have done split single crochets all the way around this heel for the amount of stitches that we have for the heel. Now the rest of the instructions will be for any stitch count. It will create a really nicely fitted heel. And here's what we're going to do. We're going to go ahead and move the stitch marker and do the first stitch in this round in a split single crochet. We're working everything in split single crochets. Put that stitch marker back. And now we're going to decrease the next 2 stitches by split single crocheting those together. And now we're going to do split single crochets until 2 stitches before this next stitch marker. So we're just going to split single crochet until 2 stitches before the next stitch marker. Now that I'm 2 stitches before this next stitch marker, I'm going to split single crochet those 2 stitches together. So I've decreased 2 stitches along the bottom part of this heel. And now I'm going to move this stitch marker and do 1 split single crochet into that stitch and place that stitch marker back into that stitch, just moving it up around. And now I'm going to decrease the next 2 stitches as well. So I'm going to single crochet 2 together. And then across the top part of this heel, I'm going to split single crochet across until the last 2 stitches before the first marker in the round. And now that I have 2 stitches left before the first marker in the round, I'm going to split single crochet those together. So now I've decreased 2 stitches along the top of this sock, which means per round, I'm decreasing 4 stitches every single time I go around. This is our repeat for this sock to decrease for the heel. We're just going to keep repeating that to where we will do a split single crochet in the stitch markers, decrease after and before each stitch marker, and keep working around. So it decreases 4 stitches per round. And you're going to keep doing that until you have approximately 10 to 14 stitches left. So now we've got a nice looking heel here. We've decreased along each side. We've got this nice line that goes down the heel, and I've got about 10 stitches left. So it's time for us to fasten off, leaving a tail to close this opening. So for these remaining stitches, we'll want to grab our tapestry needle, and then we can use the mattress stitch or a whip stitch or whatever looks best. I find it easiest to stick my hand inside here because this heel is curved. It's nice to use your fingers to put this in place. And then I'm simply going to stitch this opening closed. And like I said, you can use your preferred method. You can do the mattress stitch or whatever is the most way that you think you can hide this seam. And then we are ready to wear this sock. And just like that, you have a gorgeous pair of crochet socks to wear. I've also made these in more colors. I absolutely love these socks. You'll have to check out the Stroll fingering weight yarn because there's so many different colors, including a tweed line, which is really pretty as well. I really hope you enjoy crocheting the sock with me today. I enjoy wearing these crochet socks because they are so comfy in this stitch, and it was fun to add a pop of color work on here. Be sure to hit that subscribe button and come back for more fun crochet projects soon. Until next time.